Good evening, everyone. I'm Sarah Herda, the director of the Graham Foundation, and it is a pleasure to welcome you all here tonight for Joshua Simon's talk, The Great Soviet Encyclopedia. The Graham is pleased to collaborate with Northwestern's Department of Art Theory and Practice to present this program, which is part of the department's Visiting Artists Lecture Series. The series is made possible by the generous support of the Myers Foundations and the Gerald Lobel Fund for the Arts. After the presentation, we would like to invite you all down for a glass of wine to toast Joshua. And we also have his book in the bookshop, and to see our exhibition, Every Building in Baghdad, the archives of Rifat Chatterjee at the Arab Image Foundation. Now it is my pleasure to welcome artist and Northwestern faculty, Ika Hayduk, to introduce Joshua.
I will do this. Hello, good evening. Thank you all for coming out. Sarah has said pretty much everything that needs to be said. Joshua Simon is director and chief curator of MoBY-Museums at Bat Yam. And yes, please help me welcome him so that he can talk sooner. Thank you.
Hello, hi. Thank you everyone for coming. Thank you, Ika, thank you, Sarah. I'll explain what I'm about to talk about in a second, but I'll just say that it is obvious to me, and I think this day made it pretty clear that this is a collaborative effort. I want to thank Craig Nissen from the program really for helping me to make it happen, the talk. So what I'm going to talk about is, the title is The Great Soviet Encyclopedia Communism and the Dividual, and I'll break it down, first of all, to explain what is each part of this title, which involves neologisms on some level, very broad words like communism, that can mean many things, and a specific thing that actually I'm trying to make it into a broader one, which is a specific product called the Great Soviet Encyclopedia. So I'm coming from a few years of working on the Kids Want Communism. That's an exhibition that is now on, it's a year-long program at the museum where I work. I work in Bat Yam, that's to the south of Jaffa, one of the oldest cities in the world, which is part of Tel Aviv in Israel. And out of all the places in the world, in that specific place, we're dedicating a whole year to the 99th anniversary of the Bolshevik revolution. And I think it is thanks to the fact that we're so peripheral that we are able to do it. And I guess also it has to do with the times. Well, next year probably there will be a lot of centennial celebrations that will discuss what actually happened. So it basically will be real existing socialism to a larger extent, let's say. But what we were looking for is actually what could have happened, what might have happened, what should have happened, and what might still happen, which is a concept that I think is alien to us today when basically there's no future. With the notion of the end of history, I come from the Middle East, we experienced it firsthand, I guess, with the New World Order. The end of history also meant the end of the future, being that the future became the contemporary in that it was more of now. That was the future until these very days. But it is changing. History is coming back, as we know, in horrific forms in different places, also in the Middle East. And so with it, I'm sure that communism will also re-emerge. So what is that communism? I will start with just describing a little bit the exhibition. What we did is that at the museum it dedicated the whole year for that. So it's several cycles of exhibitions. While we work on this project with different institutions in Europe. So Skuc Gallery in Ljubljana, State of Concept in Athens, with the Tranzit in Prague, with the Free Slow University in Warsaw, and with the Center for Visual Culture Research in Kiev. Part of these places, the word communism is not allowed to be said in public, namely Poland and the Ukraine. if you are familiar with new legislation in these countries, without mentioning the crimes of basically the Russians, or the Soviets. So that's an interesting fact. So let's see the trailer we did for the first cycle of the show. I want to see if it, okay, it doesn't jump again. Okay, that's great. So the premise is this. This is not nostalgic in any way, or, well, of course it is also that, but the whole project comes from the idea that we're actually living in a world where, to paraphrase the Communist Manifesto, specters are haunting Earth, and these are specters of anti-communism. Meaning that from the spread of jihadist Wahhabism under the auspices of the American empire to neoliberalism and the European Union, from the disastrous war on terror to the destruction of the welfare state, from the debt economy and surplus absorption to privatizations, from game theory and disruptive innovations to cybernetics and its products, namely the internet. These are all anti-communisms fighting each other and now haunting us. And so in this apocalyptic moment that on every level kind of suggests a biological, a social, mental, emotional destruction, that is exactly the moment where we are suggesting communism. And by suggesting communism, the idea is that it is not only real existing socialism, but it's also this idea of communism. So more than any other word, communism is that word that expresses the opposite of the reality that champions and celebrates exploitation and inequality. Whenever capitalism goes, it brings with it, as a possibility for its radical negation, communism. But communism is not only that negation of us and them, it's also us becoming the future. And by that, it generates a very different dynamic. Communism is a whole cosmos that was devoured by the black hole that is 1989, 1991. And this cosmos includes many communisms. So it's the reestablishment of property-free communities. It is communal indigenous societies. It is real existing socialism with its achievements and crimes. It is the long, heroic history of anti-fascist resistance and the defeating of the Nazis. It is a theology of equality. It is the Revolutionary Party. It is internationalism, and the emancipations of nations from imperial rule. It is gender equality and education for all, the abolition of capitalism through its internal dynamics, and the unexploitable pockets of resistance that cannot be appropriated. The already present humane solidarity and camaraderie shared by people everywhere, and the political proposal of the emotion called love. That's from the press release for the show. With this, you of course will see that I'm very much following several thinkers that I will describe their work in a minute. But specifically, I want to use one work in the exhibition. This is Nicole Vermeer's The Great Soviet Encyclopedia. It's basically an incubator that is also a sarcophagus with an edition from 1972 published by Macmillan. So it's the English version of the Great Soviet Encyclopedia. That's the Soviet answer to Britannica. It's basically knowledge that, you know, when we have groups coming in, most of them haven't seen even an edition of an encyclopedia, being that there's Wikipedia and so forth, yeah? But more than that, it suggests knowledge from a different world, a world that no longer exists. In that sense, even reading between the lines, even if you would say, okay, everything that's written there is a lie, it's all ideological propaganda, whatever. People come in and out in different editions because there are purges, and then they are rehabilitated, right? They're bringing them back. Fine, but today that is not even relevant. So reading between the lines even is not relevant for us in a way. It's knowledge from a different world that doesn't exist anymore. And in that sense, we can use it exactly to think where we are, like to think at where we are. And I'll give you some examples, kind of just to show how people are already doing it anyway. A new film by Adam Curtis was aired, I guess, online a week ago, HyperNormalization, and that is a term from late Soviet Union. I'll show you the trailer of the Adam Curtis HyperNormalization.
Men are all alike.
In what way?
They're always bugging us about something or other.
Can you think of a specific example?
Pose and snap a selfie. There you go.
Look at that. Isn't that cool?
I'm sorry to hear that you're depressed.
It's true. I am unhappy.
I'm not real. I'm a computer model, made piece by piece. And then your doctor says, "You're looking so much better."
Is the volume okay for you? The volume of the, okay. So what we did with this Great Soviet Encyclopedia edition and the display with this display cabinet by Nicole Vermers is to use it as an opportunity, as a platform for discussions and conversations and presentations and screenings, exactly trying to highlight terms or knowledge that is from the Great Soviet Encyclopedia is now not only that edition, but basically real existing socialism and beyond as this huge book of references that we can use to actually explain the world we're in. So hypernormalization is a term that was used in the late years of the Soviet Empire to describe a situation where everyone was aware that everybody's lying, but still they kept as if, because there was no other option than to continue as if it is not a lie, if that makes sense. So it's basically how we live today. And we are dreading, you know, the agents of change, because it's obvious that these agents are agents for a change that is much worse. And we have to stick with those who are agents of the current, already bankrupt system, basically. So, yeah, I mean, we can see it in, if we move on to kind of more theoretical sides, we can see how alienation still exists in relation to social production, let's say, through pensions, where theoretically you would want to be sacked because then it would look better on your portfolio because your employer has your pension in the stock exchange buying their stock. You understand this? So this is basically shifting alienation from production to finance also. It still exists. That's not the topic here, but I'll go through some of the works and explain what was the logic of the let's say, idea of what communism means. So today we have two, let's say, close to the outward kind of discourses of communism. One totally rejects any reference to Soviet Union, like the experience of real existing socialism is not of their concern. And it's namely, you know, those who see the communist hypothesis, those who see the communist horizon, Jody Dean, Alain Badiou. And then you have people coming from the real existing socialist experience and still thinking of communism. Sorry. So that would include the Boris Groys and Slavoj Žižek and Jurčak and Yekaterina Dego and Christina Kaira, I can say, and also Susan Bach-Morse. I mean, this is writing from last decades. But it is very much informed the exhibition. And what we did is actually combine the two, like this horizon of communism and also just imagination that cannot exist anymore after 91. What were people imagining? So I'll show you some projects just briefly to see. This is a project by Ohad Meromi, who's an Israeli artist who's been working with constructivists in like Meyerhold and Rudchenko and Stepanova and others aesthetics. He's gonna have a public sculpture in Long Island City erected soon. But he had one on J Street in Brooklyn that was very much a Stepanova, the Stepanova reference. And here this is called a structure for rest, and it's a platform for daydreaming. It's based on ideas of Ernst Bloch, but in the reality of the 24/7, you know, never-ending labor protocols that we're in, where also sleep is part of, it's managed. In the reality we're in. This is also to show some of the, like the space of the museum. This is a diorama by an artist called Noah Yaffe. So it's basically two photos of planet Mars taken by Viking 1, but made from an actual material. So it's framed, but it's a double wall, and it's actually glass, water, it's aquariums that look like a photo, and these are two photos that were taken by machines. One is the Viking 1, that is supposed to be in the small frame, looking like a hologram, but it's actually laser cut glass. And the other one is the little rover that was sent out of Viking 1 and took the first black and white photo of the surface of Mars. So you see that one on the other side. The references here are basically questions of outside. The Red Star, that's the name of this project, is also a name of a novel, but also a name of every sport club, wherever you were in the Eastern Bloc. And that is because the USSR, which in its name has no territory, it's a republic, it's not Russia, the R there, was supposed to be that Red Star. It was supposed to the Red Star Mars, where you have these stories of a possibility of another society. For example, the sci-fi book from 1908 by Alexander Bogdanov, The Red Star, tells that story. And the movie Aelita from 1924 tells the story of a communist rebellion on Mars. So that's very different from today, where it's actually the idea of colonizing Mars today is the idea of duplicating what didn't work here, there. So after we exhausted the resources of this planet, we're supposed to do the same to another planet once we cultivate it. That's the idea of Mars today, right? And if you saw all these movies, The Martian, or the one that love travels through time, Interstellar, beautiful idea there. Yeah, so that's the reference. And in addition, the Perm Museum of Art in 1923 changed one of its galleries into an observatory with the idea that not only engineering, I would say, but the limits, like physical limits and the limits of the visual can be, art is supposed to transcend, and with these technologies we can find a way to do that too, in relation specifically to our social order. So that means that the red star, looking at Mars and so on, is supposed to inform us on how we're supposed to live here. Other projects include a 3D movie by Mika, who's a New York-based artist, who did a 3D movie about the blue and the red. Unfortunately, I don't have the file of the movie. It's a silent film. But the blue and the red, when they overlap, they make the 3D in the glasses. There are different techniques, but that's the basic technique he's using. And what he's asking is, what happens when you don't have the red? When you have only the blue, the flatness is a specific flatness of what he suggests is standing over like a void, that kind of blue. So if you think of ads from the 1990s, Gillette, like that cool blue that was showing up after the collapse, after the implosion of the Soviet Union, he's using that, he's using Avatar, I mean, other movies that have the blue in them. With a question of using the myth of the Cyclops to ask, but if you have two eyes, why aren't you seeing two different images? Why are we seeing this depth? So that already refers to, or has a reference to dialectics and so on in relation to the visual. Other projects, this is called Charging Station by an artist called Nir Harel. This is from a different round. It's the same space that the Ohad Meromi beds were, yeah, right? And what you have here is a kind of a gamified workspace where you can, on everything here, you can basically work on your iPhone. And it's a meshing up of Rudchenko's Culture Club for the Workers together with immaterial labor, I don't know, Google Hangout kind of space. And what he's doing actually right now in these coming weeks, together with another artist, is different sessions of movement in the space, titled Strengthening the Core, which comes from, well, these things, these exercises. Interesting thing is that the hammock, you can only sit in it two people, basically. It's uneven when you sit only one. It's just, you're on the floor, basically. You can't really. And this already refers to what I will discuss, which is the Dividual, which I will try to propose. Well, I'll first contextualize this term, and then I'll try to propose it in relation to the great Soviet encyclopedia, or like communism. Another project that I'm showing here is a project by a group of 5 artists that come from former Soviet Union. Their name is, they call themselves the New Barbizon, because they started by going back to painting, meaning that they perform painting as a verb in public space, where they just take drawings of people. But then they also upload it on Facebook. It's very, very immediate. And so it is a report. There is a sense of, even when it's caricatures, it has a sense of realism in it, in the sense that it reports about the world. What we did with them is actually exhibit works that they did now about childhood in the USSR, with works that they actually did as kids. So this is an etching and a print from the 80s by Olga Kondina. And these are drawings by a 9-year-old. This is Zoya Cherkassky from Kiev. You see her friends, the pioneers in the classroom. You can even see in the map that Kiev and Moscow are in the same country. It's really beautiful. This is a 9-year-old. Then this is Asya Lukin, also drawings from the 1980s. And more academic kind of drawings by Natalia Zurobova, who also did this display. You can see this strip that continues, which is a day of skiing. And a day of skiing, the way she describes it, to me sounds similar to the marathons we have now. Basically, it is exercise, but it's no leisure, in the sense that everybody goes up to the mountains to ski, and it has to do with competition, it has to do with keeping yourself fit. It has to do with basically the Cold War, with being prepared. And if we think of where we are today with, I would say, questions of gentrification in the inner city, but also these embodying neoliberal notions of I'm my own limit and so on, you see how these marathons that are everywhere, it's like after the biennials, you have the marathons as the thing that proliferated everywhere. And the battles come after the Holocaust museums, and the Holocaust museums after. Anyway, there's a history of things that just pop up everywhere. So suddenly, this pops up, and what is it? What's the meaning of this? What is it playing? And I see the marathons as kind of a contemporary version of that in a way. There's more to say about that. So this is like one of these niches where they were displaying these drawings. Our partners also feed the program with a lot of content. And you can see here Ernst Bloch with students, and you can see here Herbert Marcuse with students. This is a display about school praxis in Yugoslavia. It's a philosophical circle. It has to do with, well, basically the core is Croatian, but this has to do with a form of internationalism that basically doesn't exist anymore. We reprinted copies of their journal, and Vlad Vidmar of Skuc Gallery, he curated this, and this involves also showing films from the time, and so on. And that school praxis is, like, to make it very, very kind of vulgar, is considered the link, let's say, between Frankfurt School and the Ljubljana school, namely Renata Salcel and Alenka Zupancic, Mladen Dolar, Slavoj Žižek, to name some of the people that are in that group. So it, again, tries to show the contemporary, I would say, insistence on dialectics in a longer kind of history. Another project is by a Transit, which is a group of curators in Central Europe, and they have different offices, and this is the one in Prague, where they are showing films from FAMU, which is the archive of the film school in Prague. Now, this is an interesting, well, basically we all know 68, the Soviet invasion. The idea in this program is that 68 could not have happened without, of course, the demands for more political leeway, political liberties. But these liberties could not have been demanded without the cultural renaissance that Prague was experiencing. And the cultural renaissance that it was experiencing had to do with foreign students in Prague. And foreign students arrived to Prague because it was part of the Soviet bloc. So basically the story of the film school is the story of the films that we're showing are by filmmakers from Sri Lanka, India, Iran, and Syria that came to study there, and we're showing their student films, basically films in Czech. The funniest one is called Winter in Czechoslovakia, and it's a kind of Jean Roche, like this, you know, a petit à petit, like this, you know, the Africans coming and doing an anthropological survey on the Parisians. So it's a kind of a version of that. It's a guy from Sri Lanka learning what is, you know, European winter. So boots, snow, all these things. It's really a nice movie. This is just to show the extent of the presence. So this is 61. This is in Prague. a demonstration after the assassination of Patrice Lumumba, first and I guess only elected president of Democratic Republic of Congo. So you see that it is, I mean, it is male dominant, but still, I would say, to some extent, ethnically diverse in Prague. Then a project that I was very much kind of involved with, and here this would be, I guess, the last presentation of this part, which is, yeah, these different ideas of what would communism be and what is the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, is a project called Year One, Jewish Arab Brotherhood. So communism in Palestine, which is the land, part of it is, well, I would say all of it is controlled by the state of Israel. So Palestine, the land, the word communism means there a Jewish Arab unity. So the story of the party is that this is a European party in the sense that it's before the establishment of the Comintern, that's 1923. The party was established in Palestine in 1919. This is after the First World War where the British were there. They had a mandate until 1948. So the party was illegal under the British, 1919, was recognized by the Comintern in 1924. People from the party were active in establishing also the party, the Lebanese Syrian party. They had ties with the Iraqi party, of course, which was very successful, and with the Egyptian Communist Party. All have amazing stories, specifically these. But what we did is we focused on what we call Year One. Year One is the year after 1945. So 45 is year zero, basically, supposedly. Supposedly we know who won Second World War. Supposedly we know where we live. But it seems that after 1991, it's no longer obvious. Although the Soviets did defeat the Nazis, it's no longer obvious if actually the Nazis were defeated. And that's the way, that's one of the kind of underlining ideas of this project of the Kids Want Communism. So Year One is a condensed series of events that offer a parallel trajectory, a potential history, if you may, to Palestine that, of course, as we know, didn't take place. So being that the British and the Soviets were on the other side in the Second World War, communist parties were allowed to operate, for example, in Palestine since 1943. That was the year that they dismantled the Comintern, which was supposed to organize these parties in order to show that they're actually not controlling them from outside. And so what happened in Palestine is, since there was the Great Arab Revolt, this is really, I'm going into detail, but I have to kind of establish this. There was the Great Arab Revolt against the British, 36-39. Although it was a Jewish Arab party, actually, and it was legal, the Arab members were still being harassed and arrested. And so the party actually decided to split to a Jewish and an Arab party. The Arab was underground, the Jewish was half underground, half in the open. And after 45, with, you know, this great victory, they started collaborating again. And so 46, you have April 46, the general strike against the British, which was very successful. It was outside the Zionist unions. And if you know, general strike is a major idea in communist, in Marxist thinking. But, you know, nothing came out of it. So this is April 46. Then in 47, they are invited to Yugoslavia by Tito and to help build the Samac-Sarajevo railroad, which was part of a bigger project to connect Yugoslavia together. So, and then after that, they were invited to Prague for the first event for young communist movements from around the world. So they were the group from Palestine. Now I'm telling all this because I'm going to show you some photos, because we were able to research photos from this period. A lot of them are by the same photographer we discovered, Jakob Kasten. It's a long story. It's probably another project to do. But what we also did is found 2 people who participated in these journeys and interviewed them. And one is Uda El-Ashab. He worked, he's 94, he worked as a printer in the daily called El-Ittihad in Arabic. It's the Communist Party daily newspaper in Israel. And there's also another person interviewed who actually passed away after we interviewed him, David Rabinovich, who had a very different life from Uda El-Ashab. But they are together in these photos. You can see, do you see a little bit of Uda's face? I mean, you see their shape. You see him here. This is him. And this is David Rabinovich next to him holding the banner. You can already see the ideas in the banner, right? Jewish Arab Brotherhood. Then you see Uda El-Ashab is marked here with a pen. This is when they got a medal, because they were a group of 20, 10 Jews, 10 Arabs. But they got a medal because they were working so well. In the front is a member of the party called Sasha David Khanin, who was one of the leaders. His son is now a member of the Israeli parliament, Dov Khanin. It's probably, if you're familiar with the history of, let's call it peripheral communisms, a lot of times it runs through the family. I would say even American communism is on some level peripheral communism, as it was never, realized. And it is a family. I mean, from the literature I know, it many times runs in the family, and there's a dialectic there. There's also a great reaction in the family, generations changing, and so on. This is a very nice photo where you had 55,000 volunteers coming to Yugoslavia, and this is Louis Aragon and Elza Triolet in the same photo with Uda El-Ashab, our friend. Above him, also on the side, is Rabinovich, and then Sasha Khanin, you can see him, and others that I can tell you their names, but I didn't go into detail about them, so I'll save you the... And then these are photos already from Prague. So they were so successful, they got the medals, and they were invited to Prague. So it's the same summer of 47 now. And what you have is a Jewish Arab delegation going in the old city of Prague. So remember, it was the site, like 61, like 15 years later, it's the site of that demonstration I showed you, of the students. And you have also, can you see the banner? The Road to Freedom, Arab Jewish Unity. You see that? And now, this is an image that today we wouldn't know how to read. It's like a multi-stable image in the sense that you can either see the faces or the vase. You can't see them both. This multi-stable. So it says Palestine, but you have the flags of Israel. You see this in the lower? This is like, and you should, I mean, for someone like me, this is exactly what this project is about. To realize, first of all, that there is a perspective from which everything looks different, and the potentials are just totally, radically change when you look from there. And that's exactly, I think, this image, because today we can't even, everyone who is for a kind of, the Israeli Communist Party itself is a Leninist party, meaning that it recognizes the right for self-determination of nations. And it recognized the 2 different nations. And it did that. It was the only Palestinian party to, like non-Zionist party, to actually embrace the partition plan or to accept it in 47. Being that it comes from this logic. But dialectically, it of course created a different reality, because you did have couples that are Jewish Arabs. So their kids were the future that was no longer the either-or, was already something else. You understand this idea? So within this history, this image appears, I would say. So this was just to describe the project and kind of where I'm coming from. I think that also some of the kind of, I'll show you the... This is another video that we did for the show. Basically, it's the closing ceremony for the 1980s Olympic Games. I think his name is Mika. Yeah, And he has this, did you see him cry? I get goosebumps every time. Okay, so we covered 2 terms out of 3. Now I'll just say a few words, like coming from research that had to do with basically the commodity, which is again kind of, I think we are more and more, I worked on this book called NeoMaterialism, which tried to be and attempted to, I don't think it's needed anymore. It kind of lost its urgency, this whole speculative realism and so on, I feel, or triple O. But at that time, it was kind of more bothering for me. And anyway, the idea basically is that the whole notions of dematerialization in finance and in the arts, which are pretty much parallel, like late 60s, early 70s. And what happened since is actually a rematerialization, or as it's called, neomaterialism. Basically, it's an opportunity actually to understand what materialism is, because it's no longer related directly to a material thing. So how come they can fence or territorialize something that is not land? And they do it. That's the internet, they call it. So I'll go into that. I think that also a lot of the research that I won't, of course, present here has to do with actually other versions of things that we have today. OGAS, the program for a Soviet internet, or CyberScene, the Chilean socialist version, which teaches a lot of how we are where we are today, because those were very different ideas of networks, I would say, but this is not the presentation now. So I covered 2 terms, let's say, communism, basically, and this perspective of the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, and now I'll go into the Dividual. So I'm going to the Dividual through the commodity, because that's how I came into it. This is the last chapter in this book, but I, of course, developed it, especially for this occasion, based on the research done in relation to the Great Soviet Encyclopedia, like the applying of knowledge from there here, okay? Let's put it that way. So a little bit of background, basically. I will begin with the commodity as a materialization of our social relations. This is, classic commodity fetishism. And what are the social relations of production today? Debt and the individual, like the debt economy, right? Debt, being in debt, indebted. Contemporary writing on the individual, and Soviet knowledge in the individual. That would be kind of my wrapping it. So let's go into it, because it's pretty dense. Up until now, I was just reporting about things that already happened. Let's see if this can happen. So I start with the ghost trap. You know this from Ghostbusters? And this is a good object to describe the commodity as a materialization of our social relations. And by that, what I mean is that it, of course, the famous kind of Marx example of, look at the table in front of you, look at your breakfast, or David Harvey uses this, look at your breakfast, and you see the whole world is already here in the social relation. So where was this mic, produced? The materials in it, this mic that I'm talking into, yeah? And so on and so forth. And you go over everything. And of course, many of these things are means of communication, being that this is paper, this is a phone, this is a microphone, this is a computer. But also, this is a medium. The glass, water, of course. The water knows. Water knows. It is a medium in the sense that there is a frequency that goes through it and is connected to everybody who was in every moment doing something. And by that I also mean the knowledge that enabled this to be here now. So to give you an example how we treat these things very differently, I will give the example of organic food, whole foods, for example. So we pay for, what are we paying for in these places? We're paying for transparency, for the feeling that we are actually able to know where this came from. But actually, as we know from Marxist tradition, every time money is involved, you're actually, come on, what's the word? you're actually deprived of something. You're actually, well, I lost the word of litroshesh. Yeah, you kind of, yeah, you lose something. And that, by that I mean, in relation, for example, to Whole Foods, what we are paying for is for the knowledge that we lost. Because if someone knows how to grow an orange, it's a knowledge that was also part of us. You understand what I mean? We were also part of this, but no longer. And that's why we have to pay for it. And everything that we pay for is actually knowledge that was lost. So it's taking care of our kids, taking care of our parents, things that a generation ago would not have been in the money economy, basically. Now it's obvious to us that that's where it's supposed to be, because we don't know how to be with a 3-year-old all day, especially because of the condition we are in, which we are also paid for knowledge that others don't have, and we have to teach ourselves, and so on. Yeah, you understand this idea? So that is why, okay, I hope you, yeah, you follow this example with Whole Foods, but basically it's this idea of transparency that we are paying for, but actually we're paying for the fact that we lost that knowledge of growing the orange, okay? Some spiritualism, let's say, that's really important for this kind of dialectics of materialism. It is usually, the idea is that, and in this country, I guess it's also kind of something big, creationism and Darwinism are put as oppositions. But if we think about creationism and Darwinism, we see that they tell pretty much a similar story, and that is the pre-human and then the human, right? 6 days of creation. The 6th day is when man and then woman come, right? And Darwinism pretty much, well, the origin of species actually suggests the same, right? With going from non-human to human. But there are other ideas of subjectivity that actually involve a subjectivity in things. So reincarnation would be one. Yeah? Now, in a kind of a paradoxical way, I would suggest that the Marxist idea of the commodity as the materialization of our social relations relates more to these incarnation traditions, let's say, or different forms of knowledge about subjectivity that are not creationist or Darwinist, yeah? With the ghost trap being an example. So the whole world is already here, yeah? Many times we see in movies how everything is data, right? So suddenly the world will be transparent and will be numbers, but it's not numbers, the world. The world is made of the subjectivities that made it. All the people that did this floor, you know, did this ceiling. So the voice that is now heard is echoing, and on some dimension, that is labor, they are also here. Yeah? Okay. So, from this, let's move on to, let's say, protocols of production today. It is kind of well-known, it is common knowledge that it's like a post-Fordist world and so on, and of course, more and more reproduction labor is totally within the market, as I was describing before, reproductive labor. But I want to show you how the assembly line is still here with us, and then I'll start using some knowledge from the Soviet encyclopedia. So this is a guy from a band called One Direction, and what he does selfies. But you can see, I mean, this is a GIF, so it repeats. But what you see here is him smiling with the fans, right? You see, and then he's not smiling because he's not working. His work is to smile, and then you see that, right? Now, we have a kind of a term for this in like history of real existing socialism. Has a term for this, and it's called the, I would say, I mean, the relation to social networks that I can see in real existing socialism would be Stakhanovism. Now, what is that? So usually we refer to social networks and so on as something that has to do with branding yourself and so on. But if we look at it as a form of labor in which we are, of course, as we know, generating value, and that value, there are certain institutions that are able to monopolize it and to make profit out of it. That is labor outside employment, which we all experience. So you can be unemployed, but still you generate value through your subjectivity, which is in this ability to socialize, which can be channeled in these corporate, the word spaces makes it sound wide, but corporate channels that were made by the US military, as we know, that's the internet, the real existing internet. So within this logic, so Foursquare, Twitter, Facebook, Tumblr, these are all punch clocks that you're just swiping your card when you go into work every time, all the time. I'm here now, I'm here now, I'm here now, I'm here now. You understand? This is what this guy is doing, basically. Now, Alexei Stakhanov, this is the cover of Time magazine 1935. This has everything to do with today's Ukraine. This is like East Ukraine, miners, how's it called here? No, like miners' land, or like, you know, Kentucky or something. Like, it's a miners' land, okay? I don't have another word for it. And Stakhanov exceeded his quotas, or quotas of production. Now, this is a big shift that happened from a form of Taylorism in the Soviet Union, and they, of course, adored in the early stages Ford. But it's the shift towards the 5-year plan and what is called shock work. So people are exceeding their quotas. This is also an aesthetic shift from the avant-garde that we know to socialist realism. And I'll go into that at the end. So this miner is on the cover of Time magazine. Why is that? Because 1929 is begins the Depression, basically begins with a Wall Street crash. But Soviet Union works. It works. It's the only place that works. It works. They're producing stuff. There's things happening. Of course, with huge cost, human cost. But that is why this guy is on, this random guy in a way, is on the cover of Time magazine. Time magazine also tells you that circulation of this issue is more than 560,000. Now, it's not telling us, I mean, it is telling us that we're part of this imagined community of readers and so on, but of course it tells it to advertisers, right? That's the idea. So this is the logic where you are the commodity. What's being sold is you as the reader for the advertisement space and so on. So he is already part of this economy, we have to understand. But so Stakhanov, it became a movement where everyone was supposed to exceed their quotas of production, and there was more and more. Now, parallel to this, you have questions of surplus in this world, and one of the ideas of creating work for people is planned obsolescence. Here in the US, the beginning of the 1930s, was almost became a law where you would have a little stamp on every piece of furniture that says that it has an expiration date. Now, of course, we live in that world, but without, so printers, computers, of course, there's an expiration date. But it's not for the creation of labor, it's for something else today. But Stakhanov can teach us a little bit about people like Kim Kardashian. So, because what you have here is ecstatic work with these circulation systems. That's today's production, let's say. But we can learn more about it through looking at what was going on in the Soviet experiment with the Stakhanovites, with these workers that were overproducing. Now, Second World War is, of course, supposed to be the savior from the Depression here. But in the Soviet Union, what it did If you know the Woody Guthrie song, 300 Nazis killed from your gun, killed from your gun, killed from your gun, some of you know it, about this sniper lady, 19-year-old who killed 300 Nazis. Those were forms that it has to be understood also. She actually visited this country. Eleanor Roosevelt invited her in 1942. You can find the song, beautiful song, strange lyrics, but nevertheless, it's a sing-along. You can find it on the internet with people singing together. So this is the logic. Now, we are today almost a decade from 2008. Second World War starts September 1939. That's after August 39 was the first time French workers got paid vacation. That's when the vacances starts, a whole month. August 39, World War starts, September 39. So I'm just saying I think there is a connection, but in addition to that, it's 10 years after the Wall Street crash. Now we're looking today more and more into this kind of new world war through proxy and so on, that I think has to do also with the circulation, and this, if you watch the HyperNormalization film, it touches that a little bit, but not in relation to a world war, a circulation of this situation that is after industrialism. Okay, so this is one example of how to use Soviet knowledge in relation to our contemporary condition, okay? Alexei Stakhanov or Kim Kardashian explained through Alexei Stakhanov. I think it's a whole discussion about selfies. What's the history of the JPEG format? That was a kind of a precursor for that. And Abu Ghraib is an example for like something that would be a format of distribution. 2004, it was distributed everywhere. Even to the extent that the last photo of Kim Kardashian before she was robbed in Paris, it's starting to show the nature of these images, which some scholar called neoliberal optics, where every image is both pornographic and terroristic. Every image that we have, through the surveillance machines, through, it's a whole history from the photo booth to the selfie. Okay, so now the Dividual. There are many things to say, but basically, we have the word individual. Individual, basically, it says something that cannot be divided from itself, but is separated from the rest, separate from the rest, okay? That's the individual. So we are individuals. In us, there is a negation by definition, right? The individual, it's in there, the negation, literally. Now, this term appears in different places. The most common use is through a beautiful Marxist text by, I would say, by Gilles Deleuze from 1992, or at least the translation in English is from that year, a postscript for the societies of control. It's a beautiful text that basically explains the world we live in based on ATMs. This is before laptops. And what he's saying is that we moved from disciplined society to society of control. And in disciplined society, you have these, he calls it, I think, enclosure spaces that you move from 0 to 100 in each one of them, and they're separate. So you grow up in a family, then you go to school when you're old enough. When you go to school, first thing they tell you, you're no longer at home. Now it's the school, new rules. You start kindergarten, you finish, you graduate with your finals. Finish that, you go to the military. That's his example. He comes from France. You go to the military. Go to the military, again, you start, basic training, you finish a sergeant or something. Finish that, go to the university, again, they tell you you're no longer in the military, now you start, freshman and so on, and you graduate, you go to work, and so on, okay? These are contained kind of spaces of meaning that are the making of, they make the disciplined society. What he says is that today, and I think we all experience this, we're in a control society where all these things are together all the time. So I might be working, but I'm still studying, and I'm still at my parents' house. You know what I mean? So you no longer experience that gradual, well, this individual experience, right? So this is one thing. The other thing he mentions, which relates directly to the ATM, is the change from the signature to the password. And he gives other examples, but basically what you are is, of course, data, and you move from being, well, say, a person. So questions of, it's no longer credit, it's debt. Because credit is based on my good name, my reputation, and I give you my signature, and I give you my, I give you my word, and we shake hands. But now it's opposite. Now it's debt. So even microloans, it's debt in the sense that production doesn't give enough yields. It doesn't give enough profit. Everything has to move into people actually paying rent for everything. That's privatization. This is no longer Deleuze. This is just moving on from his ideas. Because privatization is a form of taxation without representation. Because what used to be services, education, health, and so forth, are now life taxes. So you do pay your taxes to the state, but you also pay these life taxes that you have to. I mean, no one will hire you without a cell phone, so you have to have a plan for that. And then you have an address, you need an address, and then you need this. So before entering the employment market, you're already in debt, okay? Now, the other thing, which I think this One Direction guy showed very nicely, is that the assembly line didn't disappear. What happened is that now we are the assembly line. So all the machines that we're using, even with Ford, one of the things that he describes is how if you break down the protocols of production, you would need only your right hand for 20 different jobs that need to be done on the assembly line, and then 2 hands on 20 more, and then also legs on 5 more. So he's already cutting the body limb by limb, you understand? And these are the machines we work with today. They're using us, parts of us, all the time. We plug in here and there. And this is what, in the book, it's called the overqualified. The overqualified is, we're all overqualified for this labor market and the employment market. But because if in the 1990s they said it could be a one-man show, technology enables you to shoot the video, put the music on, put the subtitles, put the voiceover. Like you have a computer, you have a video camera, it can work, you can play in the movie. But in reality, we do these things, but for different projects. So for that project, I'm putting the subtitles in, and for this project, I'm holding the boom. And what you have here is a situation where you have people who know to translate, know how to write code, know to play music, know a million things, and then they're using bits and pieces of this knowledge in different things, while to cover their expenses for just to support their livelihood, they are adjuncts, or they are replacement teachers in an elementary school, and then in the evening, hostess in a trendy cafe, right? I mean, we know these people. These are the people, in a way. So this is everyone. Well, I gave a very specific scenario that has to do with the art world, but I think it relates to everyone in the forms of labor that we have today. So what would be the Dividual? Deleuze basically is paraphrasing Guattari, where he says in that text that he can already imagine, so there is this Dividual, this form of subjectivity that exists in the world of debt, that is no longer an individual, that is a product of the society of control. This is what he sees as the Dividual. And this is a very grim image, of course. So that's societies of control. Now, this year came out 2 books, one by Gerald Drowning, Dividum, and I'll show you the other book later. So Dividum is basically the Latin word for divisible. This is Cicero, translating Plato, and Epicurus also. The word divisible translated to Latin. What he does, and you see this very Guattarian subtitle, is of course picking up on Deleuze, but going back with the definitions of that word, and of course, let's say the different origins of this term, and they come from Roman law in his book, and they relate directly to prostitution and slavery. So these are, of course, forms of unpaid labor, we can say, and of course, you can apply it immediately to our world and so on, to different forms. What he suggests is a condividuality, which is a term that I don't know if it's so useful. There's something more kind of relevant for kind of a Marxist reading, but it's an interesting dealing with Dividual, and of course coming from this world of debt. Another book that came out this year, Banking on Words by Arjuna Padurai, I feel has more kind of to, in this presentation at least, there's more to say about what it offers, because what Padurai is doing is, in addition to the Deleuzian, this societies of control presentation of the individual as a product of this world, and of course things have become much more complicated for our subjectivities since 1992. And he mentions, for example, derivatives take most of the book, basically. So this dissection of our subjectivity, chopping up, he puts it in relation to another thing. And that other thing, I can call it the dialectics of the individual. That other thing is indigenous traditions. And now I'm going back to what I talked about. In a way, it relates to what I was saying about the ghost trap. Indigenous traditions where, for example, McKee Marriott, who is an anthropologist from this city, from writing at least in the University of Chicago in the 1970s, when he was writing about different rituals in South Asia. And so that is where you are already part of something. That is the individual. So you don't even need the condividuality. You're already part of something, the individual. So this is what the rituals are doing. You are transformed by them, because it's not a journey of myself that I'm going through this, like, I don't know, contemporary forms of New Age, ayahuasca, vipassana, these things that we go through as an individual, so to speak, but rather opening up to individuality. That is what those ceremonies, these rituals are supposed to suggest. So these are two contemporary writings, and I think I can add to this kind of dialectics that Padurai suggests a third one, which would be, of course, from Soviet knowledge. And this is the image that I showed that is kind of for this lecture, and this is a beautiful poster by Elisitsky. This is 1929. Look at the dates. This is 6 months before the Wall Street crash. This is what is called the Russian exhibition in Zurich in the Museum of Applied Arts. And it's pretty amazing image, where you have something that looks like a factory, let's say, in the bottom part, right? And these two figures. Aesthetically, these two figures, of course, come from photomontage. I mean, it's a one figure made out of two, right? But it comes from photomontage, but at the same time, it already predicts, which is a kind of an aesthetic trope of the avant-garde that we know so well. But at the same time, it's also predicting already socialist realism, in the sense that these are grand portraits, right? You see them in relation to the architecture. They're bigger than the building. That's unique. And I haven't seen, anyway. And then the other thing is that there is this excitement. There is this enthusiasm, as we call it in, Soviet enthusiasm, which is a specific thing to the time of the Stalinist time, this portraiture of excess excitement, I would say. So this is a silver print. Now, this exhibition, again, 1929, was in the Museum of Applied Arts in Zurich. And what it showed is basically typography, theater, some publishing. It was Soviet design and set design from the time. So these are just some interiors from the exhibition with models and so on. This is one kind of model for a monument for the 10th anniversary of the revolution, which is 1927. And so Lisitsky was basically at that time parallel to this working on the set design for I Want a Baby, a play that was basically, he wasn't able to actually show Sergei Tretyakov. So this is him with the set design, which is pretty remarkable. And just to go back, I mean, to this, thing that is one, that is two, that can be one, that, he did in 1920 this beautiful children's book, you know, the story of the two squares. And I think it already proposes, if you move from 1920 to 1929, a different subjectivity emerging within real existing socialism. That is another level of this dialectics from those two squares, and one, the black crashes, and you know the story, to this. And what kind of Appadurai is also suggesting, because he's also referring to his own work in Mumbai, anthropological work with people like different anti-gentrification movements. He proposes the individuality that he recognizes there in contemporary Mumbai. He suggests this in direct relation to ethnicity, caste, gender, as something that is beyond those things. So no one will recognize themselves as, you know, claiming something for their caste or claiming something for their ethnicity, but it's something else. And basically it's a reintroduction of class. This individuality that is the form of subjectivity in the debt economy. So proletariat would be maybe this form of, well, I would say, subjectivity in an industrial society, and it goes all the way to some advanced forms of socialism. But then there's a tipping point, and it's interesting that, so Soviet Union was happening, right? It was producing and so on, but it was already thinking post-Fordism. It was already thinking, this is the first year that they implemented the 5-year plan. Now, of course, the human cost is, we know this, but what I'm trying to kind of hint on is that there is knowledge there on how it can be and how it can be together. So that's why I kind of highlighted this part. So I think I want to show you two things, like at the end. One is I want to recite something from Woody Guthrie again, which in a way says something about the individual in relation to class. And this is from Tom Joad. So it's his version of, like, it's kind of a monologue from Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath. And I won't do the singing because you'll get some music later, but I'll just, so Tom ran back where his mother was asleep. He woke her up out of bed, and he kissed goodbye to the mother that he loved, said what Preacher Casey said, Tom Joad, he said what Preacher Casey said. Now this is the quote from Preacher Casey, if you remember. Everybody might be just one big soul when it looks that way to me. Everywhere that you look, in the day or night, that's where I'm going to be, Ma. That's where I'm going to be. Wherever little children are hungry and cry, wherever people ain't free, wherever people are fighting for their rights, that's where I'm going to be, Ma. That's where I'm going to be. So on the one hand, it's a one big soul, but at the same time, it's separated in all these places, disseminated. So I'll just show this little video that I found on a Russian website, which actually was shot a house from where I used to live. And if you live on a street, you recognize it. So it's strange that that's how it got to me. But if you think, again, of that object, first of all, right, as something that relates to these subjectivities, so the object also has in it carries with it subjectivities. This is Bezalel Street in Tel Aviv, basically. Someone was moving that day. I didn't know.
Килограмм пианино на спине, человек идет пианино другому. 200 kilos, piano, I can to play.
Izraelios dobil. Cheese, 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 cheese. Ватан, cheese. Улыбнись.
Что, Ватан? Ну, ставишь назад? Да.
So just see what he's doing when he finishes with the piano.
Не трогай ничего. Давай, я тебе подворачиваю.
Так а что, ты становиться не будешь? Стой.
Going for the guitar. So, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm up for questions, yeah.
All right, so, yeah. Do we have a microphone? All right, so.
I would say, hey, if anyone has any questions, maybe that would be a nice opportunity for that.
Hello?
2 questions? Okay. Yes.
I
hi.
have my.
But the microphone is on?
So I have a couple questions. First, so you compare Stakhanov and Kim Kardashian. So it's known that Stakhanov record was organized special way. It's nobody can actually obtain these results. It was whole thing organized and it was not realistic. And he was made up this way. So you basically saying that Kim Kardashian us is not her, but artificial. That it's made up by somebody because her us promote her like fame, and it's real. Stakhanov record is, from the other hand, is not real. It's all made up. So I would argue that Kim Kardashian much more natural than Stakhanov, and conceptually different from her. It's okay. Then I have second one.
Okay. So to answer this, but just to put this kind of, let's say where I would like to put this knowledge is exactly, okay, relation to the body. That's a good example. So how you exhaust yourself. Basically, we're all Stakhanovites today. We have celebrities to personify our pathologies. So basically, she as much as he are just it's a way to put an image for what I'm talking about, which is everybody's exhausting themselves all the time with the screens and so on.
But everybody knows that she does not do anything. So this is the truth. But from the other hand, Stakhanov is known did something and put to cover of Time magazine because he obtained like coal like nobody before, which is not true. This is a lie.
Yeah, but this is just the difference between, well, in both cases, we could say that on the level of truth and lie, both are kind of lies that tell the truth. Yeah. And that truth has to do with the protocols of production, let's say. So from a productivist economy that has to do with the actual coal and so on. And not only that, I would say, your metabolism. You are the person inside the pit, okay? You're with a jackhammer, okay? Think of also American songs. That's going to be the death of me, right? John Henry. So you're already there. You have, this is not just, but anyway, so he's working there. His metabolism, the fact that he exhausts himself, is then that coal is moved, or Magnitogorsk, or any other site like this, is moved to other places that then it makes the railroads, it makes the electricity, the heating, and that is something that other people also experience as movement, as heat. So we are all in this metabolism, okay? That's the 5-year plan, that's shock work. And Kim Kardashian is in that sense it's not that she's no different, but we can start looking at where we are today, and she's an example to that, by learning from these forms that this metabolism goes through all these systems.
Okay, my second question, because I live in a long time in Soviet Union, and you make example from Whole Foods, that you coming to Whole Foods, you can basically buy everything, and you exchange this to some primitive experience that you may have. Now, this is not only about Whole Foods, it's about everything. In Soviet Union, you cannot do anything. If somebody needs to repair your toilet, you need to be friends with this person. You cannot buy it. So you cannot buy anything. You can grow potato somewhere and eat it, and that's it. All other things, not money exchange. You need to have friends, and money nobody cares, basically, because this money is very low and it's just nominal, right? So what is your basically comment on this? You saying that whole food is bad, sort of, overall. And I would argue opposite, that communism is bad. So how would you argue against it?
I don't argue with it's very basic. For me, the Soviet Union defeated the Nazis, first of all. That's a historical fact. I have, you move from these conversations with your friends and then with other people when you do these presentations. I have basically very little patience to answer to what was wrong with the Soviet Union. No, let me explain why. Let me explain why, and this is important. Let me explain why. It seems like I'm overreacting, but you have to understand, the world we live in, the way I see it, really questions who won the Second World War on so many levels, from Dayton, 1994, to Oslo, like these are peace treaties within a one system without Soviet Union, to questions of organized labor, to questions of welfare, to questions of what is our subjectivity and where we are today. So in that sense, it is the most urgent question, the way I see it, the question of what we can learn from real existing socialism and from communism beyond this criminalizing. Basically, in every kind of gathering of people who think about change, always comes up, whoever wants power, it's a problem. He's a Stalinist or whatever, coming from the left. We have to find new ways of whatever, and we have to find different forms of organization that would be horizontal and so on. I'm not there. I'm in a different place. I'm in a different place that asks questions about what can we learn from the Soviet Union.
Hi. Thanks so much for that presentation. It was so thought-provoking, and I'm going to try to sort of form into a question a lot of thoughts that are right now going through my head. You seem to be talking about the individual, and in that image and in other cases as a form of community, in the sense of like a coming together of community. And I'm thinking about ways in which communism, in recent theorizations too, should make place for incommensurable difference, right? So the idea that in this era of the end of history, although we are affected by global capitalism, we are differently affected by it, right? So we have the ways we labor here and the ways our labor is pretty much a form of knowledge capitalism is not the same as ways of laboring in countries that produce our iPhones and our clothes and so on. So it seems to me that, and you know, there are different experiences of race, of gender, of sexuality, et cetera, et cetera. So how do we reconcile those ideas of differences with the idea of the individual and communism?
Yeah, that's a very nice question, especially because continuing from, I'm sorry for this, continuing from the previous question, it is the questions of, okay, the reality that challenges us today and the projects that we do have brought us somewhere, but where is that? So for example, identity politics and so on, how do we come to terms with this in relation to class? And of course, you can't make the generalizations so simply, that is me, although this is of course, my immediate, I don't know, preference. But I would say that the individual exactly offers something that is in the left, the class basically discourse, or like for those who are discussing class, lost in the left, in whatever there is as left. That is because, and this is maybe, I don't know, I don't know if it's right to say it, you know, coming from outside in this country, but basically what we have, and this is my understanding, is that liberation movements demanded equality. And one by one, they had achievements in which, and this is basically kind of thinking after Susan Buck-Morss' Dream Worlds and Catastrophe. Basically, the way it was interpreted, equality, is access to the market. So you begin after the Second World War with white teens. That's called rock and roll. You put them in the market. Before that, they weren't there. Also, people that can observe surpluses of production, of noise, that is music, that's called rock and roll, of plastic plates that are called vinyl records, right? Radio sets, and so on. Then you move on, and one by one, you see that what we are left with liberation movements that demand equality in the industrial world is access to the market. So it can be access to the market for labor market or employment market for women. But in what condition? That this is an employment market that is deunionized, because this happens after the cracking down, you know, like basically defeating the unions. This happens where the question of domestic labor, unpaid labor, is not resolved. And it happens actually because you need a two-income household to continue absorbing surpluses of production. An example, and again, that's why I'm kind of saying that I don't know if it's a good idea to, anyway, I'll just say it. The 2008 primary elections in the US, you had Obama and you had Hillary Clinton. Each one is personifying one of these liberation movements, right? And it's, of course, a very exciting moment for this kind of a historical moment. And then at the same time, in regards to finance, it didn't really matter who would win. They would have both done the same to a certain extent. And that means that we have a problem with those struggles, like with where they are today. That's what I mean. So you understand where I'm coming from. Instead of, again, trying to protect the insistence on class, I would rather critique those other available concepts of how to think difference. I hope this makes sense. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah.